Welcome to today's Prophecy in the News. I'm J.R. Church.
And I'm Gary Stearman, and today we have a very special guest on Prophecy in the News, Dr. Lennart Möller, author of The Exodus Case, the new revised edition.
Dr. Molar, it's a joy to have you to come with us all the way from Stockholm, Sweden.
It's a pleasure to be here.
I think it was, 2004 when you were with us last?
Yeah.
He had just published a book called The Exodus Case. This book has 40% more material in it. It just keeps growing and growing as he continues his research. And we're going to talk about the new things he's found in the case for the Exodus. The Exodus Case is the name of the book. So we'll be back with the story in just a moment. The Exodus Case. What a book. It tells the story about the exodus of the Jews out of Egyptian bondage. It tells about their trek across the desert, and then how they crossed what some have called the Red Sea. The Bible in the ancient text calls it Yam Suf. And Dr. Molar, who is with the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, Sweden, became interested in the Exodus and the crossing site. He actually went over there with some underwater cameras and took some shots at the crossing site, beginning with the Nueva Peninsula, and found what appears to be chariot wheels and remains of chariots and horses and humans. It's really a fascinating story, and he's here today to tell us about it. Gary, first question.
Indeed. And Dr. Möller, may I call you Leonard?
Sure.
You call me Gary.
Yeah.
And let's talk about some fascinating things. Now, you're quite a detective. You're a medical researcher at the Karolinska Institute. I think you have the mind of a detective because you've gone into an area that people had forgotten about for thousands of years, and you have looked at little clues, place names, geographical elements, and tracked the Israelites across that sea down there and made a very convincing case for the location of Mount Horeb. But in the revised edition of your book, The Exodus Case, by the way, excellent book. In the revised edition, you've gone a step further and you've done some geographical and etymological research work in which you found place names on old maps in that area.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
It is very interesting, and the thing is, first, I love these ancient maps. They're so beautiful, the colors and everything. So for me, it's artwork. But then the next step is that they actually contain a lot of information that we have lost. They had this information 200, 300, 400, 500 years back in time. And that is what I'm really looking for. So my family, now and then we go to London. My now rather, relatively speaking, old daughters, they are more than 20 years old. And then with my wife, they go to Oxford Street. I go to other locations. And I spend the whole day looking at ancient maps and really look for the real one and the originals. The thing is that we have changed a lot of names over time. We have changed name in the modern history and in the ancient history. And now when we travel around in these areas, we have all Muslim names everywhere. That's been kind of Muslimified, whatever I should call it, during the last 200 years in time.
So you've gone back and you've obtained maps, and you've got in your book some maps that are in the French language. Some of these date back to the 18th century, mid-18th century. But that would be, by the way, before the founding of the United States. And on these maps of the Middle East, in plain language, you find Jewish names in what are today Arab countries. Now, this is amazing.
Yeah, the thing is that we can assume that Jews have been living on the Arabian Peninsula for many, many years, because we have had the Yemenite Jews that was airlifted to Israel in the early 1950s, and they claim that they lived there for about 2,000 years or even longer. But there are so many names, and if we look at these old maps, we can find names like Horeb, the mountain of God. I mean, that is labeled on many maps, even back to the 1500s. Being in the land of Midian, that is in Saudi Arabia today. So that is a starting point. So I started with Mount Horeb and can actually see that in different languages from different cartographers where they actually locate the mountain in the land of Midian in today's Saudi Arabia. Then the question is, you know, a lot of people have problems with about 2 million people, 40 years in the wilderness on the Sinai Peninsula. Mm-hmm. The Sinai Peninsula across is about Los Angeles in size. It's not a big place for 2 million people to wander around. And then it's mostly a lot of mountains there. So it's just a few wadis and some trade routes that you can follow. So when people are on the Sinai Peninsula, they say there's not a trace of Hebrews here. They couldn't have been here. It's not possible, etc. They're right. Mm-hmm. They were never there. They just passed by.
This is amazing. Now, J.R., everybody talks about the wilderness wanderings, and before we came on today, we were talking with Dr. Möller about the wanderings in terms of place names. I'm looking at Numbers 33, and you've got a whole list of place names for the wilderness wanderings. One called Rithma, and one called Rimon Perez, and one called Libna and Risa. Oh, these names just go on and on and on, and nobody knows where they are. So taking that as a starting point, you actually tried to discover where those places are.
Yeah, and I look at it from a very simple perspective. I call it the scientific perspective. And if God told Moses to make a list of the campsites, then I just believe that you can use it as a travel log and be at the locations and actually holding it in your hands and see, does this fit there, and etc., etc. That's for me to do an experiment, to be at the locations.
Wow.
You know, sometimes, I mean, it's a cold case, if we should call it so. But you can do certain things. You can go back to the crime scene afterwards, even long after that has happened, and you can find something that you missed the first time, even if there is a long time period. So we know roughly these approximately 45 campsites. The first 15 we know of, they are from Egypt to Mount Horeb or Mount Sinai. We can discuss exact details about it, but roughly we know where that is. And the last 15 we also know roughly. That was east of the Red Sea, it was east of the Dead Sea and today's Jordan, and in to Jericho. We know roughly where that was. Then in the midst we have about 15 campsites. No one knows anything. No comments in the literature. No one is writing books about it. Nothing in dictionaries. Nothing. And that makes me interested.
Well, J.R., I think we've kind of opened up here an interesting subject, and before this program is out today, and you've got to stay with us, this gets to be very interesting indeed.
It certainly does. And by the way, I wanted to mention to you that you can get these books from us. The Exodus Case, and also the video, The Exodus Revealed. I would like to encourage you to do that. This book is $39.95 plus shipping and handling, and the video is $24.95 plus shipping and handling. This is the book. It's over 448 pages, filled with incredible photographs. As you can see, it's enamel-coated paper and color pictures all the way through. It is full color. And I just wanted you to see some of these pictures here. And then, of course, the video is in full color that shows this gentleman taking the camera down underneath the Red Sea, as we would call it, and looking at the chariot wheels and the various things. This is absolutely mind-boggling. And this one now is $39.95. This one $24.95. You can get them both from us. Just call the phone number at the bottom of your screen and order them today, will you? Let us send them out to you. And you can be thoroughly amazed at what this gentleman has discovered. Let's talk about Mount Horeb for just a few moments, around the mountain itself, because that's where Moses got the law. That's where Moses visited with God. What is the mountain like today?
That's a very interesting question, because normally we have the traditional Mount Sinai on the Sinai Peninsula as a kind of an image, a mental image, and we relate to that. But when we are in the land of Midian, where we're supposed to find the mountain, it is a very different mountain. It's in an extremely dry area. It rains once every third year or fourth year. It's very, very dry. But this mountain is different. And when we climbed the mountain, it rained on us 2 times that day. Really heavy rain. I mean, it was not just a few drops, really rain. And the whole mountain is based on an ecosystem with water. So we have trees like fig trees, we have almond trees, and that's what you normally have in a garden. You can't have these trees in a desert. That's absolutely impossible. You have ponds all the way up on the mountain. And in these ponds we can find dragonflies that have their whole life cycle in water and just have a few days of their lifespan in air. And we find frogs, same there, the whole life cycle in water. We find a lot of vegetation of different kinds that need permanent access to water, plus that we see the water everywhere. So it's a remarkable mountain only based on that. It is a remarkable mountain.
Now I want you to understand that this gentleman is a scientist. He works at the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, Sweden, with many other scientists, works a lot in DNA. Tell us a little bit about your background. The reason I want you to know this is that he has presented a case here that is scientifically documented like no other case you have ever seen. So tell us a little bit about your background, will you?
I'm doing research on the DNA level, and we look at DNA, and we look at damage to DNA, we look at how diseases can affect DNA, or how changes in DNA can cause diseases, and how this is linked, and how lifestyle can affect DNA, and how we can modify aging of DNA. We look at things in the environment like nanoparticles, how they can affect DNA, and we look at drug development. So diseases involved in this, if we can have such drugs developed. And actually we had one that went very well rather recently, where we actually can play around with this and adjust it back to the normal situation. So that's what I'm doing. And when I work with DNA, that is a language that is an enormous in volume, all the letters there. And I try to read and understand that. And it's not a big difference really to try to understand the text of the Old Testament. And I use the same approach. In science, we have DNA. We try to read it and understand it. We try to read the misreadings and whatever it is. And we do it systematically, and we do experiments. The same thing I'm doing with the ancient biblical text. If it is an explanation of a route they just traveled for 40 years, and they name campsites and everything there, and they have a text about this. I analyze the text. My experiment is to be at the location, and then look at all the documents that is around this, and then I just report it as I would do in a court. When we call that forensic medicine, or here we maybe call it forensic archaeology, I don't know.
So you can see he's very analytical. Now, getting back to Mount Sinai for a few moments in Saudi Arabia, it's cordoned off. There's a fence around it. They don't let people in. How were you able to get in? Tell us a little bit about your journey.
Yeah, it's a very special type of journey. I lived with the Bedouin in the desert, and really lived with them under all circumstances you live in a tent, and they bring the goat and cut the throat of the goat and start to prepare the food and everything. So we really lived with them. No hotels in the normal sense at all. Yeah, it's a special thing. We got permit to be in the area, and we were actually allowed into all these sensitive areas where you're not allowed to be.
Got inside the fence, huh?
Yeah, but we didn't do anything for it. They opened up for us, and we came by invitation.
That's great.
And then we found, it's so interesting, because the Bible have a long list of things you should find at Mount Sinai. So then you just have this list, and then you come to this location, and you find that, and that, and that, and that, and that, and even more than it's written about in the Bible. Wow. And it's amazing to see all these things. Just one thing. There should be an altar at the base of the mountain, a low altar. There is one there. Then there are 2 corridors leading to the altar with about 3 feet high walls. And then just beside there, you have inscriptions where bulls are standing in a row. And the last person is twisting the tail of the bull. And this is interesting. I have a ranch, that's where we live, so I know how they deal with animals. And if you have cows or bulls in front of you, in a barn or so, and you want them to walk in front of you, you twist the tail of the last animal, and that's painful, and then they walk in that direction. And you know, when they are slaughtering animals, they smell blood, so they want to run away. So therefore we believe that they built these corridors to keep the sheep and the bulls in place. And they have to force them towards the sacrifice altar. And thereby this inscription just beside, with bulls in a row and the last person twisting the tail, forcing the bulls towards this place of sacrifice. There's so many things. It's a gold mine of things.
Amazing. And where the tents used to be, you found places of rocks around with pillars in the middle and so on. That must have been an awe-inspiring place just to visit.
Oh yes, and when we think about camping, we have a kind of imagination what camping is, but they didn't camp the way we do. But it's called hut circles. It's a circle with stones, and it was a bigger stone in the middle. And then they put their fabrics kind of hanging on this big stone in the middle. And then they had 2 big stones as a door. But we also found in the middle of the campsite, most likely the golden calf altar. It's a kind of foundation and of big pieces of rock. And there you have the bull worship inscribed on the rocks from Egypt. And the south is considered to be an archaeological site because they have fenced that area with barbed wire, and no one is allowed to get in there because it's archaeological site.
Yeah.
So it's just a matter of interpretation what it really means.
Did you go up on top of Mount Sinai itself?
Yes. Yes.
You were right up on top where Moses must have met the Lord?
Yeah.
How did you feel up there? Was there any... Was it spooky?
No, not at all. Not at all. If I should be very honest and explain exactly our feeling, when you climb a 7,500 meter tall mountain, you are tired, you are thirsty. It's 45 degrees centigrade. That's very, very hot. So you drink about 10 liters of water per day, and you're soaked wet in sweat. That's the first thing you think of. It's not a spiritual thing at all.
Not very spiritual.
And it's a rather tough climb. But when we come up on the ridge, there is the only place in the land of Midian where you can find marble. It's white marble, and they have some quarries there, or actually it's one quarry. And there they have produced 3 things. We find foundation stones and pillar segments. And it's exactly the same thing as we find in front of the altar at the base of the mountain. Moses was instructed to erect 12 pillars in front of the altar that should represent the tribes, because he was going to sprinkle the sacrifice blood on the people. And it's hard to do that on 2 million people. But if you have 12 pillars representing the tribes, in a spiritual way, you could, so to speak, sprinkle the blood on the pillars. So we find foundation stones of marble in front of the altar. We find pillar fragments, parts of pillars about this wide, about 400 pounds each, that was just put on top of one another. And exactly the same thing we find up on the ridge where they quarried the marble. Cracked pillar parts that is left there, foundation stones that didn't fulfill the criteria. And then the third thing that's very interesting for me, we found kind of tablets of stone about this dimension, about that thick. And that is the only material where you can make inscriptions, because the granite in the area is called junk granite. It's very, it falls apart like sand. It's a very soft material. So the only material you can use is marble. And marble is not to be found in the land of Midian, basically, except here.
Wow.
So, you find so many things.
Found the marble, and you found what appeared to be slabs of stone.
Yeah. That didn't fulfill the criteria, so they were just left as leftovers, so to speak, or remains in the quarry.
Some leftovers. How about that?
And JR, it's a water-based ecosystem in the middle of a desert. That has to be a miracle. How can this happen? There's water there, and we know because there was enough water that flowed out to satisfy the thirst of over 1 million people.
Yeah, and we don't have to speculate about this at the mountain, because when we look down, being up on the mountain, we just see a kind of dried riverbed. And if we measure it there, it's somewhere between 10 to 30 feet deep waters, if you would fill the dried riverbed with water. So we know that it was a stream of water, or a waterfall down the mountain.
Wow, like rapids.
Yeah, I mean, it's called streams in the Bible. I mean, it's not just a small creek, it's really flooding water out of the mountain.
And that flooding water has not flowed for maybe 3,500 years.
Well, it still is there.
It's there?
Yeah, I mean, we find on this, it's like a staircase up the mountain, and on each step you find ponds of crisp, clear water with frogs and dragonflies and plants, and in between we see the almond trees and the fig trees, and it's called the Almond Mountain in Arabic, Jabal al-Luz or Jabal al-Laus.
Wow.
That's amazing.
That takes me right, JR, to Aaron's rod that budded, you know,
Yeah.
the
Yes.
almond rod.
And not only the rod.
Yeah. His rod was made out of almond
Yeah.
tree.
The menorah, according to the instructions, should look like an almond tree, and not the candles, but the oil lamps should look like almond flowers.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a lot of almond connections.
Yes. And the mountain is called today the Mountain of Almonds
Yeah, in English.
in English.
But in Arabic it's Jabal al-Laus or Jabal al-Luz,
Amazing.
which means the almond mountain.
JR, before I pass it back to you, I just have to say, I'm sitting here with this book open in my lap. This book is worth the price just for the ancient maps. I'm looking at one right now, and he takes us on a detective trip through these ancient maps with place names that you will absolutely be amazed to discover. It's a trip.
Yeah. Such as Reuben.
Yeah, the name Reuben, found in a place like Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
And Judah.
Yeah, there are so many names that we can look at if we go to the ancient maps.
And Yemen.
Yeah, the same thing with Yemen. And there is a family of the Hebrews that had the name Yemna, that is very similar to Yemen. And we have the Yemenite Jews that lived in that area. But it's the bottom line is that we find so many Hebrew names. We even find the name Israel at one location. And you mentioned this, the desert of Saudi Arabia, which is a huge desert, is called in Arabic Ar-Rub al-Khali. Ar means desert. Rub I interpret as Reuben, the eldest of the 12 brothers of Jacob, the sons of Jacob. And Al means from or of, and Khali, that is what we mean when we say the Chaldees, or the Chaldees or so, the culture that came from Mesopotamia, close to today's Turkey.
We would call it Chaldean.
Yeah, depending on the language we're using.
But that's amazing because you have that place name in what today is Saudi Arabia.
Yes. So if we just interpret that name, it would just be the desert of Reuben from the Chaldean country or something like that, or from Mesopotamia, if you like.
And suddenly the wilderness march takes on a whole new picture.
Totally. Yeah.
I understand the Arabs have said that the children of Israel came to Mecca in their journeys.
Yes, it is said in the Arabic literature that when Moses was with his people, and that is only during the Exodus, he was with his people.
Yes.
He is passing Mecca on his way to the Promised Land. And that means that they must have been on the southern part of the Arabian Peninsula, coming up to Mecca on the way to the Promised Land. So even in the Arabic literature, we can find traces of the Exodus that is extra biblical, but they actually talk about the biblical events.
In fact, among the list of those place names in the Bible there, what reference do you have there?
In Numbers chapter 33, starting in about verse 18.
Okay. All of those names that are listed there, you have found 5 or 6 of them right in the heart of the desert of Saudi Arabia.
Yes, not in the heart of the desert, because you're right in that there is a number of names in the unknown midsection of campsites that we don't know anything about, that we find very, very similar name on the Arabian Peninsula. But they are not in the desert, they are along the coastline.
I see,
so
okay.
It seems like they walked down on the coastline and then up in what is Yemen. So they went on the western side of Arabia and then up, and then likely then went back that way.
And of course Mecca and Medina are there on the western shore, or near the western shore, with the Red Sea there in Saudi Arabia. It's amazing.
Yeah, and Mecca just means trade post, and that is a rather old place, but it was likely just a village or something like that during the time of the Exodus.
How about that? This is amazing. I want you to get this book. This is the latest edition, The New Discoveries of the Historical Exodus by Dr. Lennart Möller, the Exodus case. His case, he makes the case here for the Exodus and for the mountain. There are pictures, oh my, pictures galore of the Exodus, of the crossing site, underwater pictures. Then there are pictures of Mount Sinai and all of the various things we've talked about around it. This is a great book, 448 pages. And all of it is full color, clay-coated or enamel-coated paper, very heavy book. It's $39.95 plus shipping and handling, worth every penny of it. And I would encourage you to get the Exodus Revealed, Dr. Möller's trip underwater at the bottom of Yam Suf, what we call today the Red Sea, or what the Bible modern translations call the Red Sea. Actually, today it's called the Gulf of Aqaba. He makes his case for the site of the crossing being from the Nueva Peninsula over to the land of Midian. And it is absolutely astounding. I hope you'll get this. This is on DVD. It's 3 hours, and by the way, it has 6 extra features to it. Even has a piece from the Ten Commandments movie, that wherein the maker of the movie tells why he made it and how he made it. It's just really a great video. So this one is $24.95 plus shipping and handling. This one $39.95 plus shipping and handling. You can call the phone number at the bottom of your screen and order it from us today. We'll be glad to get it right out to you. Gary?
JR, before the program, and we only have a few seconds, Leonard told me that he felt that the Lord opened up doors to him in the Middle East. In just a few seconds, tell us a little about that. You feel like God opened some doors for you.
Yeah, I would just like to express it in the way that I haven't really made these discoveries. Doors have been opened up for me in many directions, and I've just followed these open doors, and I just report what I have seen here.
Amazing. Folks, listen, there's a God in heaven. He loves the Jewish people, and He loves the Christian, and He walks with us. He takes care of us. He answers our prayers. And this is a fascinating journey that you've had. If you don't know Christ as your personal Savior, I hope you'll trust Him today. I'm J.R. Church with Gary Sturman and our dear friend Lennart Möller. Until next time, keep looking up.
Prophecy in the News is a viewer-supported ministry sponsored by our many friends across America and in your area. For your gift of $10, you can receive a special edition of our current program on audio tape, or for a gift of $20, we'll send you our programs on videotape. For either order, call the 800 number on your screen right now.